It is said that massive, white-colored creatures which grow to up to 30 meters in length, with humanoid-like facial features inhabit the cold waters near Antarctica.
Deep beneath the ice of Antarctica, something was watching. In 2010, cameras near an underwater research station allegedly picked up a shape no one could explain. Pale, 20 meters long, with a human face staring back through the dark. Scientists call it a trick of light. Witnesses call it the Ningen. For almost 20 years, sailors, researchers, and internet sleuths have shared chilling encounters with this giant sea-dwelling humanoid, said to roam the coldest, most isolated waters on Earth. Is it folklore? Or is something ancient really down there? Let's get into the coldest mystery on the planet. The footage that started it all. Antarctica is the most isolated continent on Earth. There is no permanent population. No cities, no roads, no lights on the horizon. Just ice, wind, and thousands of feet of freezing black water stretching out in every direction. For most of human history, that isolation meant almost nothing got reported from down there. Whatever lived in those waters lived in silence. That changed with the internet. And somewhere in the last 20 years, out of that silence, came one of the strangest legends of the modern era. A legend that didn't come from ancient sailors or centuries-old myths, but from anonymous online posts. The creature is called the Ningen, a Japanese word that simply means human. Descriptions of the Ningen usually painted as a massive, white, humanoid figure lurking beneath Antarctic waters. And over the years it has become one of the more visually striking cryptid legends circulating online. The Ningen doesn't have just one look. Reports and fan depictions split into two main versions. The first, and by far the more popular, describes a huge aquatic creature, something like a whale, but with a distinctly human face and sometimes long humanoid arms ending in 5-fingered hands. Length estimates in these accounts usually land somewhere between 20 and 30 meters, which is longer than most school buses lined up end to end. The second, rarer version is smaller and stranger. Just a large head sitting on a pair of human-like legs, described as wandering across the Antarctic ice sheets rather than swimming beneath them. Both versions share the same pale, almost bleached white skin tone, and both are said to have a wide, slit-like mouth that gives the face an unsettling, almost expressionless look. So, where does a video like the one referenced in this title actually come from? Clips claiming to show the Ningen swimming past underwater cameras have been circulating online for years. At some point during the 2010s, unknown users began posting underwater footage claiming to depict a large humanoid sea creature, and those clips spread quickly across forums and video platforms. Viewers zoomed in on shapes in the dark water, froze frames on shadows, and passed the footage around as if it were confirmed evidence of something real. Here's the part almost every serious researcher agrees on, though. None of this footage has ever been independently verified. No underwater research station, no marine biology team, and no government agency has ever confirmed capturing authentic footage of a Ningen. What actually exists is a trail of low-resolution clips, second-hand screenshots, and claims that are nearly impossible to trace back to an original, verifiable source. Every time a new clip surfaces, the same cycle repeats. Excitement, viral spread, and then, eventually, someone points out the footage is either unsourced, digitally altered, or simply too blurry to prove anything at all. That doesn't mean the story is boring, though. In some ways, it's more interesting than a confirmed sea monster would be. Because a creature can't be a hoax, a misidentification, and a genuine internet mystery all at once unless the story behind it is unusually complicated. And the Ningen story is exactly that. To understand why people are still searching dark underwater footage for signs of this creature almost 20 years after the first reports, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not to a ship in the Southern Ocean, not to a research base buried in ice, but to a computer screen and an anonymous online forum in the early 2000s. Because unlike almost every other sea monster legend in human history, the Ningen wasn't born on the water. It was born on the internet. And that single fact changes everything about how this legend grew, spread, and eventually convinced people around the world that something enormous might really be hiding beneath the Antarctic ice. In the next part, we're going all the way back to where this story actually started, and it might surprise you how recent and how strange that origin really is. Born on the internet, not in the ocean. Most legendary sea monsters carry centuries of history behind them. The Kraken, the Loch Ness Monster. Stories passed down by sailors long before cameras, long before radio, sometimes long before written language reached certain coastlines. Whatever the truth behind those legends, they at least had time to grow slowly, shaped by generations of storytellers. The Ningen is nothing like that. It's barely old enough to have a stable Wikipedia entry, and its entire history can be traced almost message by message. The creature is generally described as a fictional sea creature that originated as a kind of collaborative creative writing exercise on the Japanese message board known as 2Channel, sometime around 2007. But deeper research into the forum archives pushes the actual starting point even earlier. According to detailed source tracing, the earliest layer of posts referencing the idea dates back to May 2002, with the story fading from attention for a few years before being revived and spreading much further starting in 2007. Here's roughly how the original story goes. Anonymous users on the forum described a Japanese whale research vessel operating in the Southern Ocean. According to the post, the crew had spent a long stretch of time searching for whales without much success until, according to the story, they spotted something massive surfacing near their ship along the Antarctic coastline. At first, some versions of the tale claim the crew mistook the shape for a submarine, before it apparently vanished back into the waves. It's a simple, almost cinematic setup: an isolated crew, freezing water, and something enormous moving just beneath the surface. That basic formula, isolation, cold, and an ambiguous shape in the dark, is close to a blueprint for how modern cryptid stories spread online. The story didn't stay contained to a single forum thread for long. Posts describing the encounter were copied, translated, and reposted across different corners of the internet. And with every repost, a little more of the original context disappeared. By the time most people encountered the story, there was no way to trace it back to a single original post, let alone confirm who wrote it or why. Then, the legend made a jump that changed everything. It went from anonymous internet fiction into actual print media. By late 2007, the Japanese paranormal magazine Mu had published an article discussing a mysterious white figure that had reportedly been spotted on Google Earth off the coast of Namibia, describing it as a possible human-shaped monster called Ningen, or Hitogata. That single magazine article arguably marks the exact moment the Ningen stopped being a forum in joke and became something closer to an actual discussed cryptid, the kind of creature that could show up in a paranormal magazine next to UFO sightings and ghost stories. Magazine coverage does something powerful to an internet legend. It makes the story feel legitimate, even when nothing about the underlying evidence has changed. Once a printed publication treats a claim seriously, readers tend to assume someone, somewhere, must have done the fact-checking. In reality, the Mu article simply repeated and formalized a story that had already been circulating online for years, adding its own layer of credibility without adding any new proof. And once a legend gains that kind of credibility, something predictable happens. People start looking backward, searching for older stories that might connect to it, whether those older stories genuinely match up or not. Fans and researchers alike began digging through older maritime records, looking for anything involving strange sightings near Antarctica, hoping to find evidence the Ningen had actually been around much longer than a single internet forum. They found something. And it's the story we're covering next, a decades-old sighting that got pulled into Ningen lore almost 50 years after it supposedly happened, whether or not it actually had anything to do with the creature at all. The sightings, photos, and a 1958 sea monster. Every convincing legend needs a backstory that makes it feel older and more credible than it actually is. The Ningen got one almost by accident, pieced together from an unrelated maritime story that predates the internet entirely. The 2007 magazine article that helped popularize the Ningen also connected it to a much older account, a 1958 sighting involving a Japanese research vessel called the Soya Maru. That older story is sometimes nicknamed the Antarctic Godzilla, and it describes a strange creature with a monkey-like face and a serrated fin, reportedly spotted by the crew of a Japanese icebreaker operating near Antarctica. On paper, the two stories don't have much in common beyond a general setting. Weird animal, Antarctic waters, Japanese research ship. A monkey-faced creature with a serrated fin is a completely different description from a pale, human-faced giant. But once the two stories got linked together in later retellings, the Ningen suddenly had an origin stretching back to 1958 instead of 2002. Nearly 50 extra years of apparent history borrowed from a completely separate sighting. This kind of retroactive connection is common in modern folklore. A new story picks up fragments of older, unrelated accounts, and over time, those fragments get treated as supporting evidence, even though the original sightings were never about the same thing. Photographic evidence followed a similar pattern. In 2005, an image captured through Google Earth near the Southern Ocean began circulating online as possible proof of a Ningen. The image showed a pale, elongated shape in the water, and to viewers already primed by the forum stories, it looked exactly like what they expected to see. Skeptics offered a far less dramatic explanation. They suggested the shape was most likely an iceberg, or possibly a beluga whale that happened to look humanoid from directly above. A coincidence of shape, lighting, and low image resolution rather than anything supernatural. A few years later, an aquarium accidentally added fuel to the legend without meaning to. In 2010, Japan's Enoshima Aquarium published a YouTube video showcasing ocean life its team had observed. Near the end of the clip, viewers noticed a large object resting on the seafloor with small, eye-like marks and a wide slit that resembled a mouth. Almost immediately, the image spread across forums with claims that the aquarium had accidentally filmed the Ningen. The aquarium's own explanation was considerably less exciting. They identified the object as an unusual rock formation shaped roughly like a frog, with two sponges attached in a way that resembled a pair of eyes. This same pattern shows up again and again throughout Ningen lore. A strange shape appears in a low-quality photo or video. The image gets passed around, stripped of context and reframed as proof. Then, eventually, a far more ordinary explanation surfaces. A rock formation, an iceberg, a pale whale. But that explanation rarely travels as far or as fast as the original, more exciting claim did. By the time the correction catches up, the dramatic version has already been screenshotted, reposted, and treated as fact by thousands of people who never saw the follow-up. It's worth pointing out how consistent the actual physical evidence is across every one of these cases. There isn't any. No bones, no tissue samples, no confirmed high-resolution photograph that multiple independent experts agree shows an unidentified creature rather than a known object. Every documented instance of Ningen evidence, when traced back to its source, resolves into one of a small handful of explanations. An iceberg, a whale, a rock formation, or an image with no verifiable origin at all. And yet, none of that has stopped the legend from growing. If anything, each debunked photo seems to generate 2 more claims to replace it. Which raises an obvious question. If the scientific explanations are this consistent and this mundane, why does the story keep spreading anyway? That's exactly what we're getting into next, because the answer has less to do with the ocean, and a lot more to do with how stories move through the internet. What could people actually be seeing? If no Ningen has ever been physically recovered, studied under a microscope, or confirmed by a research institution, the natural question becomes, what are people actually looking at in these photos and videos? Scientists and skeptics who've examined the various claims tend to circle back to the same 3 explanations, over and over. The first, and probably the most common, is icebergs. Floating icebergs regularly break apart into shapes that look strikingly organic: curved surfaces, rounded edges, protrusions that can resemble limbs or a head from certain angles. In the flat, shadowless light typical of polar regions, where the sun sits low on the horizon for much of the year, depth perception and scale become extremely unreliable. A chunk of ice the size of a multi-story building can appear, in a distant photo or a shaky video, to be roughly human-shaped and far closer to the camera than it actually is. Combine that with compression artifacts from a low-quality video upload, and you have all the raw material needed for a convincing sighting that has nothing to do with any living creature. The second explanation involves pale whales. Albino or unusually pale whales are rare, but they do exist, and encountering one unexpectedly could easily startle an observer unfamiliar with the phenomenon. A pale whale surfacing briefly, seen from a distance in choppy water, can produce a silhouette that looks strangely vertical and human for a split second, just long enough to be captured on a phone camera or a low-resolution research feed, and just blurry enough that the true shape never becomes clear. The third explanation is genuinely fascinating on its own, independent of any cryptid story: light refraction. Optical illusions caused by light bending unusually over cold water are sometimes called fata morgana mirages, and they're a well-documented atmospheric phenomenon, especially common in polar regions. These mirages can distort the appearance of distant objects, stretching them vertically and making them look taller, sharper-edged, and far more humanoid than they actually are. Sailors have been fooled by fata morgana mirages for centuries, long before anyone had ever heard the word Ningen, which means this particular optical trick predates the legend itself by generations. And then there's a fourth explanation that didn't even exist when the legend first started but has become increasingly relevant every year since: deliberate digital fakery. A significant portion of the circulating video evidence has been identified on closer inspection as either digitally edited or generated using visual effects software. Creating a convincing fake cryptid clip has become dramatically easier over the last decade, and as editing and generative tools have improved, the line between an accidental misidentification and an intentionally staged hoax has gotten harder for casual viewers to detect. Put all 4 of these explanations together, and the scientific community's overall stance becomes pretty clear and pretty consistent. No physical evidence of the Ningen has ever been recovered. No bones, no tissue samples, no photograph confirmed by multiple independent experts, and no marine biologist has ever formally reported encountering anything matching the creature's description during actual fieldwork in Antarctic waters. From a strictly scientific standpoint, that's about as close to a closed case as cryptid stories get. There's no physical specimen, no consistent expert testimony, and every piece of evidence traces back to a known natural phenomenon or an untraceable internet upload. But here's the strange part. and the part that makes the Ningen worth covering at all. None of that has actually slowed the legend down. If anything, interest in the Ningen has grown steadily since its earliest forum posts, spreading from anonymous message boards into magazines, YouTube channels, horror series, and now, nearly 20 years later, into videos just like this one. So, if the science says case closed, why does the story refuse to die? That question has less to do with Antarctica, and a lot more to do with human psychology and how stories spread online. Why the legend refuses to die. You'd think a solid explanation like it's probably an iceberg would be enough to end a monster story for good. It hasn't, and understanding exactly why says a lot about how legends survive, and even thrive, in the internet age. Part of the staying power comes from a simple, genuine fact about the ocean itself. Only around 5% of the ocean has been explored and mapped in real detail, leaving an enormous amount of underwater territory that remains, in a very literal sense, unknown to science. That single statistic gives almost every sea cryptid a permanent foothold in believability. It's technically accurate that humanity doesn't know everything hiding in the deep ocean, even though that fact alone doesn't mean a giant white humanoid is specifically swimming around Antarctica. But that gap between we don't know everything and so maybe this specific thing is real is exactly the space where legends like the Ningen live and grow. Part of the staying power also comes from format and storytelling. The Ningen has inspired a steady stream of YouTube videos exploring the legend from different angles, along with a mini-analog horror series that received a largely positive reception for its atmosphere and unsettling tone, with viewers frequently describing it as some of the best analog horror content available online. Horror and mystery creators are drawn to the Ningen because it comes preloaded with everything a strong monster story needs. Total isolation, freezing water, a face that's human enough to be unsettling but wrong enough to be inhuman, and just enough borrowed history, like that 1958 sighting, to feel like it might be grounded in something real. There's also a deeper pattern at work here, one that researchers who study internet folklore have written about directly. Academic analysis of the Ningen legend describes it as an example of modern media lore, a creature generated not by a single ancient storytelling tradition, and not by one identifiable author, but by the ongoing interaction between anonymous forum posts, paranormal magazines, aquarium videos, YouTube reposts, and international tabloid coverage, each layer adding a little more perceived legitimacy without adding any actual evidence. That analysis treats the Ningen as a rare, almost perfectly documented example of a folkloric creature that can be watched forming in real time, across forums, manga, magazine articles, and repost culture, rather than something inherited from centuries of oral tradition. Even the creature's name plays a role in why it feels believable. The word is written in the Japanese phonetic script katakana, rather than the standard characters typically used for the word human, which gives it a slightly alien, almost pseudoscientific tone, while still sounding exactly like the ordinary Japanese word for human. And then there's the simplest explanation of all. Modern folklore just spreads differently than it used to, and the Ningen is a near-perfect case study in that shift. A piece of anonymous fiction from a message board gets picked up by a niche paranormal magazine. The magazine article gets picked up by international tabloids looking for an eye-catching headline. The tabloid coverage gets picked up by social media accounts and YouTube channels, and with every single step in that chain, a little more context about the story's actual origin gets stripped away. Within a few years, what started as an internet writing exercise has its own detailed wiki pages, its own fan art, its own horror series, and a genuine, sincere fan base who treat it as an open, scientific mystery rather than a piece of collaborative fiction from 2002. That's really the core story of the Ningen. Not necessarily a monster hiding in the water off Antarctica, but a demonstration of exactly how a scary premise, a couple of blurry photos, and enough reposts across enough platforms can build a legend convincing enough that people are still combing through underwater footage for it, nearly 25 years after the very first forum post. So, where does that leave the footage this video started with, the alleged underwater research station clip, the pale shape in the dark water, the face that some viewers swear looks disturbingly human? Based on everything researchers and skeptics have documented so far, the honest answer is that it almost certainly falls into one of the same categories we've already covered. An iceberg caught at a strange angle, a pale whale rolling at the surface, a trick of refracted light, or in some cases, footage that was never captured underwater at all, until someone, somewhere, recovers actual physical evidence. A bone, a tissue sample, a photograph confirmed by multiple independent marine biologists. The Ningen stays exactly where it has always lived, partly in the coldest, darkest, and least explored water on the planet, and partly in the equally dark, equally unexplored corners of the internet, where a good story never really needs proof to keep spreading. The verdict. Let's step back and lay out exactly what can be said with confidence, because after 5 parts of sightings, magazines, and viral clips, it's worth separating the documented facts from the atmosphere. Here's what's actually verifiable. The Ningen legend can be traced to specific online posts, starting with early forum material from around 2002 and gaining real traction after 2007. It jumped from an anonymous message board into an actual paranormal magazine, which is a well-documented and fairly unusual step for an internet cryptid to take. It later absorbed an older, unrelated 1958 sighting to make itself feel more historically grounded than it actually was. And every individual piece of photographic or video evidence that has ever been closely examined, the 2005 Google Earth image, the 2010 aquarium clip, the various underwater videos that followed, has either been traced to a mundane natural explanation or has never been verified as authentic at all. Here's what remains genuinely uncertain. Nobody has definitively proven that every single sighting reported by sailors and fishing crews over the decades was a misidentified iceberg, whale, or mirage. Eyewitness accounts, even unreliable ones, are difficult to disprove entirely on a case-by-case basis, especially decades after the fact, in a location almost impossible to independently verify. And it's true, as skeptics themselves often admit, that the deep ocean remains one of the least explored environments on the planet, which means we've never found physical evidence, is not quite the same statement as nothing unusual has ever been seen down there. What separates the Ningen from a serious biological hypothesis, though, is the complete absence of anything a research team would need to take it further. There's no tissue sample sitting in a lab, no skeletal remains, no confirmed sonar reading matched to a verified visual sighting, no peer-reviewed marine biology paper proposing it as an undiscovered species, the way researchers occasionally do for genuinely unexplained deep-sea phenomena. Every documented trail, when followed far enough, leads back either to a known object, an unverifiable repost, or a piece of admitted creative fiction from an anonymous internet forum. That's really the heart of why this legend is worth covering carefully rather than presenting as confirmed fact. It's not really a story about a hidden species evading discovery. It's a story about how modern folklore gets built, piece by piece, out of real photographs of unrelated things, real optical phenomena, a handful of decades-old maritime reports, and a huge amount of internet momentum. Every individual ingredient in the Ningen legend is real. The icebergs are real, the pale whales are real, the Fata Morgana mirages are real, the 1958 sighting happened, the 2007 magazine article was actually published. What's fictional is the connective tissue tying all of those separate, real things together into a single, consistent, giant humanoid creature. And honestly, that might be the most interesting takeaway of all. The Ningen isn't a monster hiding from science. It's a demonstration of how a scary idea, once it's specific enough and visual enough, can pull in unrelated real-world evidence and stitch it together into something that feels far more solid than it actually is. It's the same basic pattern behind plenty of other modern legends and conspiracy theories, real fragments, arranged into a shape that was never really there in the individual pieces. So the next time a clip shows up online claiming to show an underwater research station capturing a giant humanoid off Antarctica, here's a simple way to evaluate it. Ask where the footage actually came from. Ask whether any named research institution, university, or government agency has claimed it as their own. Ask whether the footage has been independently reviewed by anyone with relevant expertise, rather than just reposted with a dramatic caption. In every documented case involving the Ningen so far, that trail runs cold fast, and that alone tells you almost everything you need to know. None of that makes the legend any less fun to think about, especially on a long night with the lights off. Antarctica really is one of the coldest, most isolated, least understood places left on Earth, and that alone is enough to make anyone's imagination run in strange directions. Just remember, the next time a shocking new Ningen footage video shows up in your feed. So far, every single one of them has led back to an iceberg, a whale, a rock, a mirage, or a story with no verifiable source at all. Whether that changes someday is impossible to say for certain, but based on everything documented so far, the coldest mystery on the planet still doesn't have a body to back it up. If you enjoyed this deep exploration, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next mystery. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.